Hi, good evening, and welcome to the TNT show, The Nation Talks. I'm your host, John Drummond, and I will be taking you through the next 60 minutes. And I'm so happy that you've been able to join us, because tonight we have an absolutely first-rate show. Of course, I often say that to presage our shows. I mean, of course, this is the 210th, so you've heard this spiel before. But it's different tonight. We're going to be different tonight. I usually talk a little bit about this being a great day for British democracy, and then going on to give you examples of why that is not the case. Tonight we've got something very different. Kevin, run the videos, please.
I think it's just a sort of feeling of utter helplessness and despair when you see day in, day out, hour by hour in the news what's going on.
We want to stand together to condemn the biggest atrocity in our lifetimes, in our children's lifetimes. They will ask us, Mum, what did you do?
It's now around that there's nothing in them and people bang for food because they're starving.
Stop bombing children!
Just doing something small like this that hopefully will perhaps gain some momentum can only be a good thing.
It just doesn't feel like anything's happening politically, so it sort of feels like everything's become stuck.
It's easy to ignore it because it is so overwhelming, but we shouldn't be. We should be speaking out, all of us.
Fascinating, absolutely fascinating, and deeply, deeply concerning that people need to take to the streets and bang pots to bring what is, in the minds of most people, a set of terrible atrocities that are taking place here and now. This is people making their views felt. We're going to be talking to two fantastic guests tonight, people who can speak with authority, or real authority. In other words, none of them are politicians, so you can trust what they say. But seriously, we've got a couple of great guests tonight, and I'm so glad that you've been able to join us and that they've been able to join us. Let me tell you a little bit about our two guests tonight. First of all, we have Avigail Abarbanel, who was born and raised in Israel, and she's the granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor on her mother's side. She served in the Israeli military between 1982 and 1984. Abigail left Israel and moved to Australia, where she lived for 18 years. And she's now living in Scotland, and her opposition to Zionist settler colonialism and to the idea of an exclusively Jewish state at the expense of the Palestinian people is very well known, and she's been exceptionally outspoken on that matter for a long time. We're also joined by Donald Reid, and Donald describes himself as a social entrepreneur and a practical visionary. That's a bit like a sort of oxymoron, like business ethics. Anyway, he studied law and economics, management studies and theology, and then went to parish ministry in the Scottish Episcopal Church. He has been a major powerhouse behind a number of particularly important activist activities like the East Timor Scotland Support Group, also addressing homelessness, and the Scottish Coalition for the Abolition of Poor Country Debt, which probably should have happened a long, long time ago. He's also with the Scottish Civic Forum promoting democratic participation, and he is on the advisory group for the Britain Palestine Project, which advocates equal rights for all in Israel, Palestine, and he's the founder chair of the PalCafe. Of more later, and also of more later about why banging pots. So without any further ado, let's welcome our guests tonight, Donald and Abigail. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's a great pleasure to welcome you. I don't think my introduction, Abigail, did you the best service it could have done. Tell us a little bit about your background.
So, like you said, I was born and raised in Israel and educated there, served in the military, and was a normal, what they call a normal, middle-of-the-road Israeli citizen. In 1991, I left Israel and moved to Australia permanently on a one-way ticket because I just didn't want to live in Israel anymore. And it wasn't because I was politically enlightened, but because Israeli society is a society that's very militant and very harsh and unpleasant to live in. And I just felt it felt wrong to live there. It felt like it was bad for me. I moved to Australia, and it took another 10 years for me to realize two things. One, that I was a Zionist, and two, that everything that I was taught when I was brought up was really indoctrination and was a bunch of lies. I began to read, I began to find out about the real history of Israel, and there have been a few significant books that affected me. And I realized I could not lie to myself anymore. All the feelings that I had that were not clear became clear. There was a framework, and I learned about the real history of Israel. I put my full story in this edited book called Beyond Tribal Loyalties, personal stories of Jewish peace activists. There are 25 stories in this book of people who identify as Jewish from 5 countries who all went through a similar process to my own. It's very peculiar to grow up in the state of Israel. It's like you're growing up in a cult. So ever since when I renounced my Israeli citizenship in protest in 2001 when I was in Australia, and ever since then, I've started to speak out about Palestine. But even then, I wouldn't say I was all the way there. It still took me time to understand that we were dealing with settler colonialism, that it is a crime against humanity. And then I had to grapple with the strange feelings that I had, that kind of tension between loyalty to the group, which I was indoctrinated upon, that you must be loyal to the group. Israel is the only thing that stands between you and another Holocaust. So you must defend the country, and you can't speak out against it in public, because that will be like airing the dirty laundry. And I was accused of giving ammunition to the anti-Semites. So, but eventually, after more education and developing my understanding, I became fully what we call an anti-Zionist, so somebody who completely objects to the whole project of Israeli settler colonialism, regardless of what excuses are given for it. And I often tell people that it's not, when people say it's complicated, I say, well, it isn't actually complicated if you understand what settler colonialism is, and you focus on the crime instead of on the personalities, as in the people who commit it or the people who are the victims, but actually look at the crime. As any good solicitor in the criminal justice system will tell you, it's the crime that matters, not the people who commit it or the victims. So if we look at the crime, there's nothing complicated. And I usually use the analogy of a home invasion. Nobody would accept a home invasion in our society. But in the international sphere, not only was it accepted, it was enabled by the British Empire initially, and later on supported heavily by the United States and all Western countries. Israel has enjoyed impunity for 77 years. And so I've been speaking against it, and I'm speaking as somebody who comes from there and who is fluent in Hebrew. So, yeah. Sorry, Madam.
Do take a drink. Is it also your view, Abigail, that Gaza should not be seen in isolation, but there is a greater master plan of which Gaza is a part?
Yes. And the master plan is settler colonialism, which in the Israeli context basically means that Israel wants to empty the entirety of historic Palestine from all the non-Jewish indigenous people who are the Palestinian, and it doesn't matter if they're Muslim or Christian, they're just not Jewish. So they need to go. Israel wants them all to go, to empty the land. So the phrase is all the land but without the people. So that's always been the plan. Ilan Pape, Professor Ilan Pape, who's written extensively about the topic and who's one of the original historians who exposed this, has always called it an incremental genocide. What you see in Gaza is simply the acceleration of it. Israel was always impatient to continue to advance this project. The Israeli Jews, the vast majority of them support settler colonialism, support Zionism, and they want to see all the Palestinians gone. It's the vast majority, and I'm saying that with complete confidence. So when Israel has always been an opportunist, so whenever the ebbs and flows of public opinion and political changes of directions in the world, Israel's always piggybacked on that. But if you look at all the actions that Israel has committed for 77 years, there's always one direction. It's always for one purpose. Israel has never been inconsistent. Israel has lied about its intentions, but if you look at what it does, it's always been consistent and always for the purpose of that. So what you see in Gaza now is simply what was always going to happen. I remember speaking in front of the Israeli embassy in Canberra, in Australia, where I used to live, in a demonstration, and I remember warning about Gaza and knowing there's going to be genocide. Well, in fact, the whole thing is genocidal. Settler colonialism, which removes and eliminates the native people and seeks to replace them with the settler colonialist people, is by definition a genocidal enterprise. So Gaza is what it looks like when Israel is allowed to run free and do whatever it wants. If Israel could have done it 20 years ago, it would have done it 20 years ago. Now the opportunity presented itself, so they are carrying it out. And the next thing is the Palestinian citizens of Israel, the Palestinians living in the colonized West Bank, and the last ones that Israel would hope, if there's no serious international action to stop Israel, then Israel would love to get rid of the Palestinian citizens of Israel as well. And altogether, the entire population between Gaza, the West Bank, and inside Israel, we're looking at approximately 6 million people. And Israel would love to get rid of all of them. So people should have no illusions about that. I'm pleased that people woke up with Gaza, because no matter how late, it's worth it. People need every bit of a scrap of help they can get. But the people need to see it in the wider context. This was always going to happen.
Really? Well, that's extraordinary. And moving to you, Donald, obviously you share Abigail's concerns about what's happening in Gaza. And I can see you've got Stop Starving Gaza behind you and a reference to the PalCafe. Tell us about the pot banging, how you became involved in it, and tell us also about the PalCafe, please.
It's easier to do it the other way around, in a way that a year ago, people in Glasgow, as throughout the world, were, looking at their screens, numb with shock and wondering what to do. And I just had, a fairly simple idea that one thing we can do, it's not a big thing, but it's something, is to set up a Palestinian cafe shop in Glasgow. The point of that being, we would be creating an outlet to sell produce sourced from Palestine. So by selling the produce made by craftspeople, jewelers, ceramicists, and other producers of food stuffs, for example, you're supporting people whose livelihoods depend on selling those goods and who've lost their most important market, which is tourists. There are no tourists. So if we could create an outlet in Glasgow for those sort of things, that helps. And the idea of setting up a permanent place with a cafe attached to it is you then bring in the general public who, buy their flat whites and their little pastry or their cake or something more than that. And, there's a bit of a markup on that too, raising more money to send to the same sources. And so we piloted this in a pop-up shop. In fact, we've had 3 now, and they were absolutely mobbed. I mean, it's really, really heartening, with people who said, oh, thank God, this is something I can do, buy olive oil, buy some ceramics, and here's some extra money in the pot, by the way. So we're on the way to creating that permanent shop. We're in discussion about a venue. We're waiting to see whether we get charitable status and so on. And it's an idea which has attracted a lot of support. Now, therefore, since we are in the business of selling food and drink, it's kind of, almost we're the only activists that's kind of got an activist group that's actually in the business of hopefully in the end selling food and drink. Obviously, it fits very well, unfortunately, with the theme of starvation in Gaza. And so somebody started this action, pot banging. In fact, it was a call out from a Palestinian called Bisan, asking people to take this action throughout the world. And I've also seen it. I've been in Brazil, where people hung out their windows at 8 o'clock every night to bang pots to impeach the president. And I've seen how this spreads. So I thought, this is the sort of thing that's going to spread. So I flew a wee kite, put out a notice asking people to join me at the end of my street to pot bang on Friday night a week ago, thinking there'd be maybe 6 people, 10 people. There were 40 people. And you saw that in the video. And every night since then, there have been 30, 40 people. And it's now not just one location. It's now 13 or 14 locations, and locations being added every day. And all those people say the same thing. This is at least something we can do, make a noise. And, it's cathartic. It means you're not just sitting, wallowing in your despair about what you're seeing. And it's something you can do. But also, it's a witness to the general public. Hence, we've got these posters. This is just printed today to say to the passerby, very clearly what it's about, which is about starvation as a weapon of genocide, as Abigail has said. We hear all the kind of stories and counter stories and the Israeli attempt to cover up what they're doing. But, anybody with an ounce of common sense can see that food is being deliberately blockaded from Gaza. And I've been in Gaza. I was in Gaza in 2013, and I heard the story of people's, being at the mercy of what the Israelis would allow through the border, including people like me, and, things like the water supply, but also everything else. So we are seeing on our screen something which, at last, the mainstream media is coming to acknowledge, and as that person said in that wee video, is the most monstrous thing we possibly will have seen in our lifetime. And, it's outrageous. So the upshot of all that is PalCafe coming back down to earth again, but is an attempt to create a humanitarian way of responding to that. And it's primarily humanitarian.
And you talked about the mass media there for a second. Has the mass media come and met with you, talked with you, discussed what you're doing?
No, absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
No, are they interested? I don't know. We did have a little real we did have some coverage from the national newspaper at one of our pop-up shops. But, since then, I don't think, we're small fry. They're not interested in that. But, maybe they will become interested. The pot banging is possibly a newsworthy item. It's been on the news, all the people gathering to bang pots outside Downing Street overnight a week or so ago. Coincidentally, at the time when Keir Starmer suddenly thinks, I'd better say something about recognition. So, I think the point of these actions happening worldwide is that they do nudge things forward, not as far as most of us would like, but they do have an effect. And I did read a very interesting bit of research a few days ago, when most of us feel, it's only us, we're in a wee minority. Apparently, there's a tipping point, which is that if about 3.5% of the population get active in a particular cause, that's the tipping point. 3.5%. Because politicians, whom you referred to earlier, not a slightly disparaging term, I think, they realise, okay, 3.5% of people out in the street banging a pot, but for each one of them, there's 20 who think, yeah, they're in the right. So it's worth doing.
Well, talking about politicians, why do you think politicians have been so... they've taken an enormous amount of time. If you were to give us your assessment of how the politicians in the UK government and the Scottish government have behaved over this, how would you characterise it?
On this particular issue, because it concerns Israel, I think they feel that they're walking on eggshells, and they're very, very afraid of an organised backlash, and the lobby which would backlash against them is very, very well organised and resourced. And I've been in the receiving end of that myself in the past. So unlike other issues, I think they're a bit more tentative. There is maybe this desire to be balanced and stuff, but it's not a balanced situation, so I don't think that's appropriate. And they're just a bit nervous and timid, and I wish it were otherwise.
Donald, you're a bit generous. I call them cowardly. And I don't understand how a lobby of a country with relatively a small community here represented in the UK, it's not even a particularly strong, massive electorate or anything. How can it possibly be so influential? So one of the things we know, and if any listeners or viewers don't know, there is a very good organization called Declassified UK, which was created by journalists who are doing proper investigative journalism that the main media don't want to do. And they are exposing all the deals that the UK is doing with Israel. And I know from Australia as well that Israel is involved with the training of police, with the training of the riot police in particular, training of clearance divers, the training of various facets of the military. I know the UK is doing, I can't tell you how I do, but I know that pilots from the UK are training with Israeli pilots. And have been long before the whole thing with Gaza started. So there's been extensive cooperation between the UK, and we also know the US and Israel. There's a lot of money involved in it.
Yeah, it's money.
Politicians are, I think of them as survivalists. They're not principled people. They are usually people who are worrying about their own careers and their own reputations, and they choose the cowardly path. And mainstream media, the same thing. Mainstream media are for-profit organizations. I wrote an article on Substack just the other day about how the Guardian, even when they report the proposed actions of Edinburgh University, which is I think a leader now in academia in the UK, finally acknowledging its history and its complicity in colonialism and in slavery. And the Balfour Declaration, which was mentioned in 1917, was written by Lord Balfour, who was the Chancellor of Edinburgh University at the time when he wrote it. So when the Guardian reports it, they are very careful to make sure that they're not saying anything. They're quoting some things. I mean, it was a big, huge improvement that they even exposed the story in the first place, that the university was considering abandoning this awful definition of anti-Semitism, which was a complete travesty, because that definition of anti-Semitism, it's another way that the lobby works, is basically equating criticism of Israel with hatred against Jews. And it's basically a tactic to silence opposition and to silence criticism of Israel. One of the reasons I absolutely loved the pod banging, and one of the videos you showed was from Inverness from 2 weekends ago, and that I agree with Donald about it. It's cathartic. I could see people venting out anger, and it was something physical that they could do. And as a psychotherapist, I could relate to that. But there's also something else. Despite Israel's biggest efforts to silence and make the Palestinians disappear from public consciousness, acts like this keep the people aware. They make sure Palestine doesn't disappear, the Palestinians don't disappear. If Israel had its way, the Palestinians wouldn't just disappear from Palestine, they would disappear from the world's consciousness. So all actions what Donald's doing is brilliant. Every action that's being taken on behalf of the Palestinian makes a massive difference. And to add also to the number that you quoted, the 3.5%, Donald, no meaningful change in world history has ever come from the mainstream. It always came from a small group of people who wouldn't shut up, who wouldn't go away, who insisted. And if it wasn't for the suffragettes, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you and having a vote or having any rights at all that I have as a female. We would still have slavery. So if people did not stand up for what they believed and went against the mainstream and against the politicians, nothing would ever happen. And I think our politicians really have to hang their heads in shame. A lot of them could be quite realistically conceived as complicit in genocide, as enabling genocide. And I live in hope that Israel will find its way eventually to The Hague and will be properly tried for crimes against humanity. All these politicians will be ones that could just hang their head in shame because they're complicit in it for failing to stop it. And they had so many opportunities to do that. And they don't even do it with Gaza.
Yeah.
You know?
Can I chip in here, John?
Please, of course. Thank you.
I mean, the other aspect, I talked about PalCafe as being a channel for basically buying stuff and supporting people's livelihoods, very practical. But the other side of it is telling the story, as Abigail says. And I'll give you an example, which had a huge impact on me. I went for a haircut nearby here in Glasgow, and the guy cutting my hair clearly was not from here, and being a nosy sod, I asked him where he was from. And he said, I'm from Lebanon. And then he corrected himself, saying, I'm from Lebanon, but I'm originally from Palestine, because he was brought up in the refugee camps near Beirut in the south of Lebanon, whereas, years ago there was a massacre organised by the Israeli Defence Force. Now, he told me his family's story, that his family had a big house in Haifa, in what's now the north of Israel, in what was a very major Palestinian city back in the day. And they were so moved at the plight of the refugees coming from post-Holocaust Europe that his grandmother thought, well, we've got a big house, at least we could do is take in a family, which they did. And within a year, they were turned out of their own house and had been in a refugee camp since then. And we're talking about 1948 then. And so this guy was a third generation brought up in a refugee camp. Now, I mean, people like us and Abigail and others read these things, but when somebody's cutting your hair and tells you this story, you think, pardon the inappropriate pun, it's not rocket science. How can there be peace when this sort of thing is happening? And so ordinary people banging a pot in streets hear these stories of other ordinary people. This is really powerful. And one more aspect to this. I repeated this story to a friend of mine who is an Orthodox Jewish rabbi. And in retrospect, I was shocked at his response, because he said, yes, you hear these stories. In other words, it was made up. So not only have the Palestinians suffered this monstrous injustice, people then say it didn't happen, it's all just made up. So there's a double whammy here of not just oppression, but kind of denying that.
Isn't it also a technical issue with the language? Couldn't Palestinians be regarded as being Semite?
Yes, they are Semites.
They are Semite. So it sounds like anti-Semite has been somehow.
It's been subverted.
That's what it sounds like. If your point is valid.
And we now know also that the present Palestinian population of present-day Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, and the diaspora, they can trace a direct line back to the indigenous population there 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, and the DNA match is 97%. Whereas many of the Ashkenazi Jews and the others who have gone back to Israel to reclaim it as a homeland don't have that genetic match. Okay. So when the Israelis say, it's really our territory and they took it over and now they just have to either just fit in or leave, actually, they are as much entitled to be there as anybody else.
I want to come back to Abigail in a second, but just a quick question. I note that Angus Robertson, a Scottish government minister, met with Israeli representatives recently. What's your reaction to that?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Okay, go on.
Just a second.
To be honest, I'm not stupid. People at government level meet with people at government level, and I guess I'd want to know what happened in that conversation. So,
well, maybe Angus could come on the show and tell us. Maybe that would be the best thing to do.
But so it's a high risk move, I would say.
Yeah, it just struck me as very odd that the Scottish government was saying one thing, and all of a sudden I saw a picture of
I agree.
going on. And I thought I didn't know what the calculation was.
Can I say something about Angus Robertson since you brought him up? I've had personal correspondence with him because he's the chair of the Parliamentary Friends of Israel in Holyrood. So I confronted him. I wrote to him. We had some dealings before to do with something completely different, had to do with solar panels. So because I had this kind of one-on-one with him, I thought I'd write to him and say something about it. And he absolutely wouldn't budge. And his reaction to me in the end, the way he had the last word in our email exchange, it doesn't matter what I explain. It doesn't matter that I told him that I am from there and I know what I'm talking about. His reaction was, let's just agree to disagree. Now, why Angus Robertson would support Israel is beyond me. But there is an undercurrent here, which Donald's alluded to as well. What you see, this lobbying, this silencing, the reason it takes such an effort to get things out, even when it's glaringly wrong, is because this is what happens when perpetrators of crimes, perpetrators of abuse, even in families. I'm a psychotherapist, so I work with abuse, domestic abuse, and trauma. When the perpetrator is allowed to dominate the narrative, this is what you get. That the victims are not only victimized the first time, they're silenced. When they try to tell their story, they're just like Donald said, it's minimized. It's just a story. Do you know, Jewish people would be up in arms if anybody said that about survivor story from the Holocaust, and people were, and it's called Holocaust denial, and there's a huge thing about that, which is fair enough too. But for some reason, of course, well, we know what the reason is, but the Palestinian stories are not, people don't want to know. But we're not going to let that happen. Activism like what Donald is doing, like what I'm doing, what so many good people are doing, is precisely about keeping this on the agenda. And this is really getting on Israel's nerves. Israel operates like mafia. They don't play right. They don't play fair. When you're dealing with perpetrators, you can't expect them to play fair. They play the game of negotiations and peace and all that up to a point, but in Israel there was never any intent. Peace doesn't mean what people think it means. Peace is just a word that Israel bandied around in order to pacify the rest of the world so it can continue the settler colonial project uninterrupted, and it worked. It worked. Everybody was faffing around with negotiations that were always a sham. They were never meant to go anywhere. Settler colonialists do not negotiate with their victims. They want them out. Israel was just stalling for time. And Israel is a nightmare, but I accuse the world of allowing it. You can have a perpetrator who wants to beat up a wife or wants to abuse a child, right? But when it becomes known, the question is what happens next? And if everybody sides with the perpetrator instead of the abused, what you get is what you get. And I work with the victims of it in families and in individual life, and also in corporate settings as well. This is an example of the same thing in international setting. These people who support Israel have no leg to stand on. They have no moral and no legal leg to stand on. And they can scream all they like, but they are absolutely unequivocally on the wrong side of history. And this is not just because of Gaza. This is because of the settler colonial project. Settler colonialism is a crime against humanity. The settlers in the United States committed it against the American Indians. The Brits committed it against the Aboriginal people in Australia. The same happened in Canada with the First Nations. This is more of the same. The only difference is that those things were historical, and somehow those colonizers were so successful that the victims kind of disappeared and stopped resisting, whereas Israel was not able to finish the job back in, back in 1948. And so it's lingers to this day. But if Israel had its way, it would have eliminated all the Palestinians right back in 1948 when the Nakba was committed, which was the expulsion of 750,000 Palestinians.
Yeah, I mean, Abigail, have you ever been accused of being anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic?
Of course, I'd have had every bit of abuse you can imagine hurled at me in the beginning when I first started. I was very naive when I started. I was much younger too, and I had no idea what I was dealing with. I had death threats in Australia when I first started to come out. I used to get harassment. I used to get phone calls in the middle of the night threatening me, calling me a Hitler, self-hating Jew, obviously, anti-Semite, obviously, traitor, obviously. So all the different names. But, you know, I'm not important. This isn't about me, and I'm not the victim here. I am lending my voice to that of the Palestinians, and I think it's not fair, and I'm saying that in the introduction to my book as well that I showed you before. It's not fair that I get a privileged stage, because if I want to speak, I get to speak. I did a lot of public speaking over the years, for well over 20 years. But that shouldn't be the case. Palestinians should be listened to, not me. But I thought, you know what? If this is the world we live in and they're going to listen to me more because I have these credentials, fine, I'm going to use my voice for it. But people really, my encouragement is for people to listen, like Donald did, to listen to the stories of Palestinians themselves. And people should read writers like Ilan Pappé. He's been telling the stories of the Palestinians from the beginning, from the 1980s, when the archival material in Israel was opened. And now they closed it again because they don't want people exposing it anymore. But he wrote enough about that, and there's plenty of research on that. We know it is true. We know the facts. Israel can scream all it likes. All perpetrators do. But you know, and also in this kind of world we live in now, with media being so prominent, you can't hide anymore.
No.
The question is not the hiding. The question isn't the knowing. The question is what people do once they know. What do politicians know or do? And we see what they do. Angus Robertson thinks Israel's wonderful, and he wouldn't stand against it.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, it's extraordinary when you put it in those terms. It really is. I mean, it is truly extraordinary. Moving on to you for a second, Donald, and picking up what Abigail said earlier, you would probably agree with this quote from Margaret Mead, which I'm sure you've heard before, when she said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, that's the only thing that ever has."
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of obvious, really. I mean, the other quote I quite like is Oscar Romero, the conservative who became Archbishop of El Salvador, was shocked by what he saw at the heart of government and was killed. And his most famous quote was, you know, "When I feed the poor," which as a church person he did, and that was okay. "When I feed the poor, they call me a saint. When I ask why they're starving, they call me a communist."
Yeah.
Which was the label they used to have him killed. Well, yeah. I mean, communist terrorist, whatever you like, it's the same tactic.
So do you detect, I mean, Abigail has put it so eloquently. I mean, I can't imagine anyone matching what you just said, Abigail. But when you look at on the ground in Glasgow and elsewhere, what is your sense? Do you detect a change in the mood despite all the suppression in the media, etc.? Do you detect a change?
I mean, a change, yes. I mean, I've been involved in lots of movements over the years, and I've never experienced such a wave of energy as there is behind this. So Glasgow's, you know, already in the right place, supporting the natural justice issues here and identifying with the victims of these perpetrated crimes, and that's only got stronger. So I think that's really a tribute to probably not just Glasgow, it's a Scottish mindset thing too, for all sorts of reasons. Maybe we identify with part of the story.
Maybe that's true. I mean, what would you like to see the Scottish government doing now?
Well, I mean, people are making quite a lot of the fact that John Swinney has used the G word when pressed at a Edinburgh Fringe event, and they're now pressing him to say, well, if you think it's genocide, there's certain steps which follow, and I'd like them to take those steps, because what again I think is so obvious with politicians, unfortunately, is that they're very good at making statements, which is about the platitudes about the two-state solution or peace or blah blah blah. But sorry, if you will the end, you should will the means. And if you're going to make those statements, you back them up with some hard-edged policies, which
like what?
Stop supplying arms, cut trade links, expel the Israeli ambassador, expel Israel from the United Nations. South Africa was expelled from the United Nations. I mean, take some real actions with teeth. Otherwise, it is just hand-wringing. I know I come from a religious background, and Avigail and I have just been through in a book group, the book by Munter Isaac, a Christian pastor from the West Bank, called Christ in the Rubble. And people might recognise that Christ in the Rubble phrase and the image of, by implication, Jesus wrapped in a keffiyeh in rubble. And, it went viral. And I agree with him that he is sick to his stomach for the fact that even the Christian churches who identify with his ministry in Bethlehem, they make all these statements, oh, it's terrible, you need to have some peace, work out a solution, blah, 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 blah. But they can't name what's happening. And you expect of all things, churches, I think, to be prophetic, to say, this industrial level killing of people is wrong and it has to stop. But they can't somehow come out and say that. So it's not just politicians, it's people at high level who are...
I'm no psychologist or psychoanalyst. I'll turn to Abigail in a second for a thought on that. But it seems to me if you allow yourself to be corrupted to that degree, either as a politician or as a church leader, it's hugely corrosive. It seems to me it's very hard to live with the degree of impact that has, particularly if people see you as someone who is attempting to set some moral standard.
And yet...
Yes. What would you say to that, Abigail?
And yet, you're right. You're right that people, if people are not psychopaths, ordinary people, if they live in a way that contradicts their own value system, they're not going to be well. So psychologically, people suffer from that. And yet, look at all modern day genocides. Mm-hmm. People lived and died in their high positions and did the wrong thing and got rewarded. I mean, look at Tony Blair.
Mm.
We were, millions of us were on the streets. I was in Australia at the time, demonstrating, wanting the West not to attack Iraq on anything. And he got away with it. And look at him now. He's a millionaire. He's going around giving talks. He's much more likely to get a huge pay for a talk he gives than any of us, little people who are not that important. The wrong people get rewarded. There is no incentive for them to do the right thing. They know they can get away with it. They know they're not going to end up in The Hague. Only the non-white people end up in The Hague. White people from the West don't, from the colonial classes don't. And so they know, there's no incentive. They know they can get away with it. So what? So they're a bit anxious. So they go to the doctor and get some medication. Or they drink a bit of alcohol. They live perfectly well with themselves by the look of it. In the meantime, people are dying.
Mm.
So we see this all the time. It happens with Rwanda. It happened with South Africa. How long did it take for South Africa? When was ever South African apartheid okay? Ever. And yet the world just enabled it. And the UK under Thatcher never even boycotted South Africa.
That's true.
And Israel were the only two countries in the world that in the end stuck to their guns and never boycotted. They had loads of deals. They have lots of markets of arms trading and diamonds going on, and they wouldn't budge. So what are we seeing? We're just seeing more of the same. There is a famous quote from Hitler. Just a second, Donald. I'll shut up in a second. When he said, "Who remembers the Armenians?"
This is true.
I studied genocide for my politics degree. My honors was in the politics of genocide, and I don't know for a fact that this is the right quote, but the sentiment of it is right. Who remembers? People live and die. They got the big salaries. They got the cushy pensions from their jobs. They retire, and then what? 1 in a million stands up and expresses remorse. Most people.
Talking about the Armenians for a second, is it true that Churchill once wanted to poison gas people in Armenia? And the answer, his military chief said, we can't do it, but not for moral grounds. They said that if the wind changed, it would blow back on the British troops.
Yeah.
I mean,
I wouldn't be surprised
that's-
if Churchill was a colonialist and a racist. So I wouldn't be surprised if he put fasting, but I can't tell you. I don't know about it.
Thank you very much, Donald.
Can I speak up for the power of people banging pots? I mean, to go back to Tony Blair, I was also involved in a thing called Jubilee 2000, campaigning against third world debt. And their way of focusing their activity was to have demonstrations around G8 summits. And for the G8 summit in Birmingham in 1998, I was part of a group organising, getting a bunch of Scottish people down there. Now, the G8 summit in Birmingham in 1990 had no intentions of discussing the issue of third world debt, as they called it then. 50 or 60,000 people turned up, including my mum on her 69th birthday. Now, my mum's never been in demonstration in her puff before. And, 60,000 people at her turned up. And Tony Blair changed tack. He came in by helicopter from the conference centre in Shropshire into the centre of Birmingham to meet with the campaign leaders, because he realised, back to this 3.5% thing, here's all these old ladies turning up. This isn't rent-a-mob. These are people who really are concerned about this issue. We better do something. And they discussed it, and they started to take some steps. And I think the pot buying thing's the same. The people on the end of my road tonight and all over Glasgow buying pots aren't rent-a-mob. They're ordinary people of conscience who are fizzing mad about what's going on. And I think that, the local MP better watch, these people are, aware, and they are watching what politicians vote for.
Well,
and
the obvious question that begs is, has the local MP been involved?
Say it again?
Has the local MP been involved?
One local MP attended one of the pot banging nearby, not mine. I have written to mine, who's come back with the usual blah, blah, blah. But, I think over the years she's been on, supportive of the Palestinian issue. And, I know MPs have to toe the party line, but it's not good enough. The party line is just not good enough. Sorry. And, that will be said.
Thank you, Don.
I just wanted to say that I think we need to pay more attention to what people do, not what they say, especially politicians.
Yes.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. It's a slightly tough one, but we're getting close to 10 minutes to go. If you were to look, as the Americans say, down the pike, Abigail, 2-3 years from now, paint us a picture of what you would like to see, and then what's practical.
Well, what I'd like to see is boots on the ground. I'd like Western powers to put soldiers between Israel and the Palestinians. I'd like the world to basically dismantle the settler colonial structure. And I'd like the Palestinians to be given a right of return into a state that becomes a state for all the people who want to live in there, not an exclusively Jewish state. Whether that's going to happen, I mean, there are two scenarios. This can only happen if the world stand up to Israel properly, not just with nonsense phrases here and there, and two-state solution. And you mentioned that two-state solution, by the way, was always fiction. I grew up in Israel. I lived in Israel. I can tell you that nobody ever actually meant it. It was just meant for Western consumption to keep everybody quiet and off Israel's back. So I would like to see one-state solution with full right of return for the Palestinian people who want to return to their land, compensation, reparations, and get on with it. What's actually going to happen, I fear that Israel will finish the settler colonial project, and we will see 2 million Palestinians from the West Bank dumped into Syria and Lebanon. We will see 2 million Palestinians who are citizens of Israel dumped into Syria and Lebanon, in all the territories that Israel has conquered there and that is controlling there. And I don't even want to say out loud what I think Israel is planning for Gaza. So this is what we're dealing with. And I've always said that, and you can accuse me that because it is my profession, this is what I see. But I always thought this is about mental health. This isn't about politics. Our political choices depend on our way of thinking and our way of seeing the world. And Israelis cannot be reformed. They are fed, like I was, on a diet of total brainwashing, believing that the world is dangerous to Jews, and the only thing between Jews and the imminent next Holocaust is the state of Israel. Therefore, all that matters is the state of Israel. And they do not see the Palestinians as human beings. The Palestinians have come to embody in the Israeli psyche they are the scapegoat for everything. They're the scapegoat for all the suffering the Jews have suffered over the centuries in Europe, mind you, not in the Middle East, not in Africa. And it's absolutely insane. So to continue to placate Israel, to continue to pretend that Israel is a legitimate country to do business with and to speak with diplomatically, that is the biggest problem. Israel needs to be made into a pariah state. And as far as what Scotland can do, Scotland doesn't have any jurisdiction when it comes to foreign policy because we're not an independent country yet. Notice the word yet. But Scotland can take some very strong symbolic actions, and Scottish MSPs can be in the parliament in Westminster and raise hell about it and challenge the government properly, and definitely not be nice about Israel or try to placate. You do not placate a perpetrator.
I mean, I think the difficulty there, which is a very good point you made, amongst many other good points, is the Speaker of the House of Commons has apparently colluded with Israel to effectively eviscerate an SNP motion, and he did it illegitimately, and he subsequently apologised, but he didn't actually fix the problem. He just said, "I shouldn't have done it, but I did it." End of story. It seems to me that there's a I don't know. I don't know. You can say this about all parliaments, but it seems to me sometimes that Westminster is a place that ethics goes to die. It just sort of, I mean, it's just
the world is giving in to the rule of mafia. Basically, there's a new book called Goliath's Curse, and it's talking about basically all of this that's going on in the world is organized crime, really. And it has no moral leg to stand on. This is not right. And we need to start thinking about how we do politics and who we give power to. We can't sit down and complain about them when we put them there.
Exactly. And this it always comes back to that. I mean, this is a very good point, though, isn't it, Donald? That, I mean, we do complain about our politicians. And most of the time we're right to complain about them. But we put them there. We are responsible, aren't we?
We are, but I mean, you can't say that the first past the post system electing Westminster MPs is particularly representative of public opinion. I mean, it's clearly not. And the games that go on to climb the greasy pole, and also I think there's an issue about the kind of people who want to be elected to the highest office. I fear that there's a kind of personality type that is attracted to that, and don't want to generalize and insult lots of very good people, but are they the sort of people we want to represent us? So I don't know. I mean, I'm not a political scientist or sociologist, but I do worry about the ego, the ego-driven approach to getting into political life. And, I think I'd want to vote for somebody who says, I don't want to do that.
Well, that would be a marvellous day, wouldn't it? Or I only want to be there for a year or 6 months or whatever. It's been tried before. It doesn't. I mean, it's almost like, why don't we have a good news newspaper? Every single attempt to produce a good news newspaper has failed. Because
this is true.
The human condition, they want to see somebody else not doing as well as they are. We have a problem. Certainly in Western society, you can't sell a good news newspaper. I know people who've tried. And anybody who wants to, I mean, somebody said something about news is what somebody somewhere doesn't want to see in print. And I think the difficulty, maybe in the West, I think, as you said, Abigail, is that's what's not happening. Most of the people who own the proprietary newspaper are getting exactly what they want. In other words, if there is any criticism of Israel, it's subdued or it's eliminated. The BBC seems to be a partner in this process as well. I mean, I don't know many people who watch BBC, but the ones that do contact me and say, this was just appalling what we saw last night. And they went to the government for a comment, and it was, we're doing everything we can. And then the next news story says the UK has just supplied spy planes to fly from Cyprus to overfly Gaza so that the armaments can be better directed. this doesn't strike me as somebody standing aside and being neutral. It sounds to me like you're conniving in genocide. I mean, that's what it sounds like to me. I mean, you're either working to stop it or you're working to continue it.
And the BBC did the same thing with Ireland too.
Yeah, I know.
It's an empire. It's an empire news outlet. It's not something that where it's not an organization. I mean, look at how they handled sex scandals and Jimmy Savile, and they have no leg to stand on. They're not a good organization. They're not an organization that can be held to high moral standards. They're doing empires bidding, and the people in charge, I think they've got a great deal of sympathy. Israel also had a lot of influence in trying to get its own people or people who support Israel into key positions. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is for real. One of the things that I think we need to do is make support for Israel toxic for people.
Yeah.
So
that's happening, though, isn't it?
I hope so. Yeah.
I mean, the support for Israel has collapsed. I mean, it's under 20% in most Western countries. So 80% of the population or the majority of the population are in a different place from our governments. So I think that will have its effect in due course. I sincerely hope so. But going back to what we want to see in the future, the question you asked, John, I mean, last time I was there in Israel-Palestine, an academic who spoke to our group quoted a survey done by, I forget which institution, which asked people in Israel and Palestine, both communities, what they thought would be the situation on the ground in 2048, centenary of the establishment of the State of Israel. And the majority in both communities thought there would be one state and that it would be called Palestine. Because, digging into the data, turned out they all at some level realised the present situation is unsustainable. And as Avigail said, all this pious repeating of the two-state mantra is bollocks, really. It is effectively one state already. Part of it is occupied, and Israel has control from the river to the sea. And maybe if we could just get rid of the pretense that two-state solution is possible, we can deal with the reality, which is an apartheid state. And then we can look at the issues, which are how do we change it from an apartheid state to being one which has equal rights for all.
Without proper action from the rest of the world, Israel will not change from within. In fact,
right.
Elon Papa talks about the state of Judea. He talks about how the religious right, and I know that very well, have basically taken over all positions of power in Israel. They've infiltrated the military, and there's not even any pretense of adhering to Western values. They don't care about that anymore. They're not even pretending. The so-called left in Israel, when I was growing up, pretended that we were humanistic and we thought about people's welfare. It was complete nonsense. It was the labor that facilitated horrendous policies against the Palestinian people, but with this aura of being enlightened and Rabin being the peacemaker. I don't know if you remember that. Now there's not even that pretense. That's it. They've taken off the gloves. They don't care about what the world thinks. And
you would think also that Britain might feel obligated to play a more positive role in addressing these issues because Britain caused the problem in the first place. I mean, somebody told me today that Britain at the end of the First World War offered Palestine to 3 different groups, to the Arabs, to the Palestinians, and ended up with the Balfour Declaration in, I think, 1917. So what they were saying was that whoever asked them, they would get Palestine. I mean, it sounds very corrupt. And I know people will be cynical and say, well, that's what foreign relations are about. You lie consistently. That's what you're sent there to do. But it sounds to me like Britain has a particular responsibility for doing more to address this issue.
Yes. And why is a Labour government, which came in promising change, not doing that?
No. In the book club on Palestine, we sometimes do meet the author, just one meeting, and we covered a book called Policy of the Seat, which actually discusses the McMahon Hussein letters, which was an exchange of 10 letters between 1915 and 1916. Remember, the Balfour Declaration is 1917. Yeah. In those letters, the British Empire promises Palestine to the Arabs, basically, in return for their support against the Ottoman Empire during the First World War.
Yeah.
So that's what you said partly is based on that particular exchange, which, by the way, the British government have worked very, very hard to try and suppress to this day.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, we've run out of time. We're going to run the videos in a second, but before I do so, I want to thank each of you, Abigail and Donald, and perhaps as things move on, you might come back and talk to us some more. Hopefully things will have improved by the time you're able to come back and talk some more. But I want to thank you most sincerely on behalf of all the people watching tonight and listening tonight. It's been very enlightening. I appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
It's a great pleasure. Kevin, why don't you run the videos, please?
I think it's just a sort of feeling of utter helplessness and despair when you see day in, day out, hour by hour in the news what's going on.
You know, we want to stand together to condemn the biggest atrocity in our lifetimes, in our children's lifetimes. They will ask us, Mum, what did you do?
It's mirroring that there's nothing in them and people bang for food because they're starving.
Stop bombing children.
Just doing something small like this that hopefully will perhaps gain some momentum can only be a good thing.
It just doesn't feel like anything's happening politically, so it sort of feels like everything's become stuck.
It's easy to ignore it because it is so overwhelming, but we shouldn't be. We should be speaking out, all of us.